before anything else. If what you're about to hear moves something inside you, subscribe, hit like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because what we are about to open together is not a simple explanation of a short surah. It is an encounter with the most concentrated text ever revealed to a human being. And once you truly see what is hidden inside these 7 verses, you will never stand in prayer the same way again. There is a surah in the Quran so fundamental, so architecturally central to the entire structure of the faith, that the Prophet himself declared, "No prayer is valid without it. Not recommended, not preferred, or required." It opens the Quran. It opens every unit of every prayer. It is recited over the sick and spoken quietly for the dead. It is whispered at the beginning of every significant undertaking, every journey, every decision that carries weight. Ibn Arabi, one of the deepest and most penetrating spiritual intellects in the entire history of Islamic civilization, made a striking personal testimony that has echoed through the centuries. Whenever he brought a request before Allah, he recited only Fatiha, and his request was fulfilled. 7 verses, 113 words in Arabic. And yet something inside this particular arrangement of language unlocks doors that no other combination of human or divine words can open in quite the same way. The question is not whether Fatiha is special. The question is, why, E? And the answer, when you truly encounter it, not as information, but as lived understanding, does not merely inform you. It rearranges you. It reaches into the interior of how you see yourself, how you see your Lord, and how you understand the nature of the daily conversation you have been having with the sky, perhaps without realizing it was a conversation at all. We live in an age of unprecedented access to information, and yet somehow the darkness weighing on human hearts may be denser now than in centuries past, when lanterns barely pushed back the night. People carry their phones everywhere and still feel utterly alone. They chase comfort with extraordinary efficiency and cannot find peace. They have answers to every factual question and no answer to the only question that matters. What am I doing here? And does anyone truly know me? And in the middle of all this noise, all this distraction, all this accumulated exhaustion, millions of Muslims recite Fatiha 40 times every single day, and never once feel the tremor hiding inside it. Not because the words have lost their power, but because habit is the thickest curtain ever woven by time. It covers everything, eventually, even miracles. Think about it this way. If you had never seen the sun rise, if you were blind from birth, and one morning for the first time the bandages came off, and suddenly the horizon split open in fire and gold, and the entire world was revealed as a place of overwhelming, almost unbearable beauty, you would collapse. You would not know what to do with the size of that moment. Your knees would give way. Your eyes would fill with something beyond tears. But because you have seen sunrise every morning of your life, you reach for your phone instead. You scroll, you sip your coffee, you move on. The miracle becomes wallpaper. Fatiha is that sunrise. Present every day, recited since childhood, embedded so deeply into the rhythm of Muslim life that the tongue moves while the heart remains entirely elsewhere. And this is precisely the tragedy we must now reverse. Because the cost of reciting Fatiha without understanding it is incalculable. You are standing before Allah 40 times a day and missing the conversation. The great companions of the Prophet understood this differently. It is narrated that when Iblis, the enemy of the human race, the one who has dedicated his entire existence to pulling humanity away from Allah, was finally expelled from paradise, he cried out 4 times. 4 moments of anguish, sharp enough to pierce even his pride. When he was cursed, when he was cast out of Jannah, when a prophet was born, and when Fatiha was revealed. Think about that for a moment. The creature most invested in human destruction recognized the danger of this surah instantly. He understood what it could do to a soul that truly grasped it. He knew that a human being who genuinely absorbed the meaning of these 7 verses would be almost impossible to mislead, because they would have found their bearings so completely, so deeply, that ordinary temptation would have nowhere to take hold. A key weighs almost nothing, a few grams of metal, but it can open a door of solid steel that no amount of force could break through. Fatiha is exactly that. Its brevity is not a limitation. It is a form of precision. It contains only what is essential, and what is essential, it contains completely. The surah begins not with a command, not with a legal ruling, not with a warning about hellfire or a description of divine punishment. The entire Quran, a book that has survived empires, outlasted civilizations, and transformed the inner landscape of more human beings than any other text in history, begins with Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praise belongs to Allah, the Lord of all worlds. This is a deliberate, architectural, deeply intentional choice. Because before you can receive anything from this book, before any law can settle in your heart, before any command can find traction in your will, you must first be repositioned. You must understand where you stand in relation to everything that exists. You must have your coordinates corrected. And this first verse does exactly that. Not through argument, not through threat, not through philosophical proof, but through the act of praise itself. The word hamd is not the same as shukr, though both are often collapsed into the English word gratitude. Shukr is specific. It is thankfulness for a particular benefit you have received. Someone fed you, so you thank them. Someone healed you, so you express gratitude. Shukr is transactional in structure, even if it is sincere in feeling. But hamd is something far wider, far more radical, and far more demanding. Hamd is unconditional praise. Praise not tied to what you received, but to who Allah is, His essence, His attributes, His wisdom, the entirety of His will, expressed in every decree across all of time and all of creation. If Allah gives you wealth, hamd belongs to Him. If He gives you poverty, hamd still belongs to Him. If the diagnosis is good, hamd. If the diagnosis is devastating, hamd. Not because you feel nothing. Pain is real, and Islam does not ask you to pretend otherwise. But because behind every decree, visible or invisible, understood or incomprehensible, there is a wisdom that does not require your comprehension to be complete. So when you say Alhamdulillah, truly say it with the heart engaged. You are making a declaration that almost no human being can make easily. You are saying, my Lord, I am at peace with your decree in every situation. Whatever you do is worthy of praise. Not despite difficulty, including difficulty, especially difficulty because difficulty is often where the deepest reshaping of the soul takes place. Can a person truly say this from the heart? Standing at the grave of someone they loved? In the hospital corridor waiting for news that might break them? After the loss that makes the future feel suddenly empty? It is easy to say with the lips, the tongue knows the sound. But to say it with the heart, to actually mean it, to feel the peace underneath the words, that is one of the most difficult and most exalted spiritual achievements a human being can reach. And Fatiha places this act at the absolute beginning, before any request is made, before any need is named, before any conversation begins. The heart must first bow in praise, and from that position of profound surrender, everything else becomes possible. The al at the beginning of Alhamdulillah is not decorative Arabic grammar. At the beginning of T, it signals totality, completeness, the absence of exception. Not some praise, not most praise, not a great deal of praise. All of it. Every quality of beauty, every dimension of perfection, every act of grace across the entirety of existence, all of it belongs entirely and exclusively to Allah. Nothing is left over for anything else. Not your own intelligence, no matter how sharp. Not the skill of doctors, no matter how gifted. Not the mercy of the kind people who held you together in your darkest moments. All of it is flow from one source, and all of it returns to one name. When you say Alhamdulillah, you are not just expressing a feeling. You are making a cosmological statement about the nature of reality. You are saying that beauty is not an accident, and goodness is not random, and love is not an evolved survival mechanism. All of it is the deliberate outpouring of an infinite source, and that source has a name. Then comes Rabbil Alameen, the Lord of all worlds. And here we must stop, because Rab in Arabic contains a meaning that the English word Lord grasps only partially. Rab is the one who creates and then stays, who nurtures, develops, sustains, protects, and brings to completion. Not a distant architect who designed the structure and then stepped back to observe. a Rab who is present at every single stage of your existence, from before the beginning to beyond the end. The one who designed the architecture of your lungs before you had a body that needed them, who calibrated the gravitational field of the earth to the precise value that allows you to walk without floating into the sky, who coordinated the trillion cellular processes happening in your body right now, at this exact moment, without your awareness or permission or assistance. Before you were born, he planned you. In the womb, he shaped you. In infancy, he raised you through the hands of those who cared for you. Today, he sustains every breath, every heartbeat, every electrochemical signal that allows you to read and think and feel. The Rab is not a figure from a past event. He is the present, continuous, active reality underlying every moment of your existence. And when you say, Rabbil Alameen, you are acknowledging this not just for yourself, but for everything. Alameen, a worlds, plural, with a scope that should make the mind go very quiet. The visible world of matter and energy and life. The world of angels, whose existence most of us have forgotten is as real as our own. The world of the jinn, the dimension of the grave, where millions currently reside between death and judgment. The barzakh, the intermediate realm between this life and the next. The akhirah, with all its stations and stages and realities that dwarf everything we have known here. Every plane of existence, named or unnamed, comprehended or entirely beyond our comprehension. Allah is the Rab of all of it. When you stand in prayer and say these words, you are addressing a sovereign of an infinity your mind cannot contain. You are small, and the one you are addressing is without limit. And somehow, this address is not only permitted, it is invited, encouraged, made the very foundation of the most important act in your religious life. The first verse of Fatiha, then, is not simply an opening line to warm up the recitation. It is a complete reorientation of the self. It places you correctly in the order of things, not at the center, but in proper, honest, liberating relation to the center. And from that position, with the ego relocated and the heart correctly positioned, everything that follows can land with its full force. Immediately after this declaration of infinite lordship, the surah pivots. And the pivot is intentional, precise, and deeply merciful in its timing. Because what naturally follows a statement of absolute, unlimited power? A human being, genuinely confronted with infinite greatness, might well crumble under the weight of the distance between what Allah is and what we are. The gap is not merely large, it is infinite. And so the second verse arrives like a hand extended downward from an impossible height. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the infinitely merciful, the especially compassionate. Two names, both from the same Arabic root, Rahmah, mercy. But they are not redundant, and the precision with which Islamic theology distinguishes between them opens something important. Ar-Rahman is vast, sweeping, oceanic in its reach. It is the mercy that causes the sun to rise over the faithful and the faithless alike, without discrimination, without calculation. The rain that waters the garden of the righteous and the land of the one who has denied God entirely. The air that fills the lungs of the saint and the oppressor with equal generosity. No one earns Rahman's mercy. No one qualifies for it through their deeds or their intentions. It flows from divine abundance the way water flows from an inexhaustible source, because that is the nature of the source, not because the recipient has done anything to deserve it. You are breathing right now, in this moment, not because your record merits breath, but because Rahman extends this gift to every living thing without condition. Rahim is different in texture, closer, more focused, more intimate in its quality. It is the mercy that deepens for those who turn toward Allah with intention and effort and sincerity. The mercy that accompanies the believer through the trials that would otherwise break them. The mercy that does not end with this world, but overflows into the next, deepening through the stages of the akhirah, and ultimately finding its fullest expression in Jannah. If Rahman is the ocean, boundless, surrounding, present everywhere, then Rahim is the current within that ocean that carries the turned heart safely to shore. It is personal. It knows you. It responds to your turning. To understand the emotional weight of these two names placed side by side, The Prophet once offered an image so precise in its tenderness that it has moved people to tears across 14 centuries. He and his companions were passing through a crowd when they noticed a woman searching desperately for her lost child. She moved through the crowd, calling out, frantic, her whole being narrowed to a single terrifying possibility. Then she found him. She snatched him up and pressed him to her chest with a ferocity of love that made the air around her go different, that made every person watching go still for a moment. The Prophet turned to his companions and asked quietly, "Would this woman throw her child into fire?" They said, "Never, Ya Rasulallah. Not while she had any power to prevent it." He said, "Allah is more merciful to his servants than this woman is to his child." Now try to do the mathematics of this. Take every mother who has ever lived, every woman across the entire span of human history who has cared for a child with that particular brand of fierce, irrational, unconditional love. Every sacrifice made in silence, every sleepless night, every meal declined so the child could eat, every fear carried quietly so as not to frighten, every prayer sent up in the dark from a heart that had no words left, only the ache of wanting their child to be safe. Gather all of it, every act, every tear, every moment of sacrifice from every mother in every corner of every century, into one mountain of compassion so large you cannot see the top or the edges. Then hold that mountain in your mind, and the Prophet told us, that mountain, that entire accumulated weight of human maternal love, is not even a single drop compared to the mercy of Allah. It is not even a fraction of a drop. The comparison is not close. It is not even in the same category of magnitude. This is what Fatiha places at the heart of your daily prayer, not a distant, unapproachable authority demanding performance and punishing failure. A Rabb whose mercy is so far beyond the reach of human imagination that the most beloved metaphor we have, a mother's love for her child, still fails catastrophically to represent it. And yet, this Rabb is the one you are addressing. This Rabb is the one who hears you. This Rabb is the one who, when you say Non Ya Allah, turns toward you with a quality of attention and love that would dissolve you if you could perceive it directly. And notice, mercy is mentioned 3 times in the space of these opening lines. In Bismillah, in the second verse, and again in the second verse twice. This is not poetic repetition for aesthetic rhythm. This is insistence. This is the Quran emphasizing. Precisely because the human tendency is toward fear, toward shame, toward the feeling that we have gone too far and done too much, and the distance is now too great. That mercy is the primary quality, the defining characteristic, the atmosphere of your relationship with Allah. Not His exception, His nature. The Quran does not begin with a threat. It begins with an embrace that has been extended before you even arrived. But an embrace without accountability would be incomplete. Love without truth would be hollow. And so the 4th verse enters with a gravity that changes the temperature of everything. Maliki Yawmiddin, you, the master, the sole, unchallenged sovereign of the day of recompense, the day of judgment, the day when everything hidden becomes visible and everything deferred becomes present. Think about what this means in its full historical weight. In this world, power appears to concentrate in human hands. It always has. Throughout history, men have risen to positions of such authority that their word alone determined the fate of millions, who lived, who died, whose children grew up with enough to eat, and whose children grew up in rubble. Pharaoh declared himself divine and expected to be worshipped, and millions complied because they had no visible alternative. Nimrod stood before a prophet and argued about the nature of life and death, genuinely confused about where the boundaries of his authority ended. Today's version of such figures may dress differently, speak the language of democracy and international law and humanitarian concern, but the structure is identical. The assumption, quiet or explicit, that power is theirs to keep, that accountability is an abstract concept that applies to smaller people, that the scales are tilted in their favor by virtue of the altitude they occupy. Meanwhile, in Muslim lands and in too many other places, the mathematics of suffering accumulate in ways that make the heart want to stop thinking. Children are pulled from rubble while the world negotiates. Mothers search through debris calling names that do not answer. Fathers stand in the wreckage of the homes they spent their lives building, and call out for daughters who are gone, and those who ordered the weapons, who signed the authorizations, who calculated acceptable losses in the language of strategy and statistics. They go home afterward. They eat their meals. They are photographed smiling. They give speeches about values. They sleep in their beds and wake the next morning with the same certainty that the world is organized in their favor. Maliki Yawmiddin exists precisely for this. Not as consolation prize, not as spiritual compensation for injustice that should have been addressed in this world, but as the ultimate, non-negotiable, structurally guaranteed resolution of every single act of injustice ever committed in the history of creation. The day will come. The sovereign of that day is already known, and he is not impressed by ranks or resources. On that day, there are no lawyers whose eloquence shifts verdicts, no alliances that dilute individual guilt, no currency that purchases leniency, no titles that cast protective shadows, no media apparatus that reshapes the narrative into something more favorable. Every atom's weight of oppression will be weighed. Every atom's weight will be addressed. The one who died under rubble knowing their name would never appear in any international report. Allah knows their name. He knew it before they were born. He counted every moment of their suffering. And the one who ordered the rubble will stand before the master of that day with nothing, absolutely nothing, in their hands. And this applies not only to the powerful who commit visible crimes, it applies to every one of us. The unkind words spoken in irritation that left a mark you did not notice making. The right delayed because delay was convenient. The prayer treated as an obligation to discharge rather than a conversation to enter. The trust quietly and almost imperceptibly betrayed. The moment when you knew what honesty required and chose something easier. All of it recorded. All of it held in a knowledge that has never forgotten anything and never will. But you, and this is the architectural genius of Fatiha speaking, this fourth verse does not arrive alone or uncontextualized. It is held between Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim on one side, and on the other, the promise of intimate, direct personal conversation between the servant and their Lord. The scholars called this balance, Khawf and Raja, fear and hope, and they were precise about why both were necessary simultaneously. Too much fear without hope collapses the soul into despair. And despair, the scholars warned, is itself one of Shaitan's greatest tools because a person in despair stops trying. What does it matter anymore? The voice says. The distance is already too great. The sins are already too many. There is no return from where I am. And in that collapse of hope, the person stops fighting entirely and sinks deeper into the very thing they fear. But too much hope without accountability produces a different kind of spiritual death. The comfortable heedlessness of someone who has concluded that Allah's mercy is infinite and therefore consequences are theoretical. They will continue to drift because they have convinced themselves that everything will resolve favorably regardless of how they live. And those who forget the account are, the Quran tells us, often the most shocked when it arrives. The correct posture is the narrow, difficult, deeply alive space between both. The person who knows they have fallen, perhaps many times, perhaps far, and who carries that weight with honest clarity, without minimizing it, without hiding from it, and who simultaneously knows that Rahman and Rahim have not retracted their arms, that the door of Tawbah opens every single moment, until the final breath that Maliki Yawmiddin is not only the verse of accountability, but also the verse of final justice, including the justice owed to you, including the account for everything you have suffered and endured and lost, while waiting for this world to balance its scales, which it never fully does. There was a man in the first generation of Islam, Zayn al-Abidin, the great-grandson of the Prophet, known as the one who prayed so much that he was called the master of worshippers, and those who knew him noticed that every time he made wudu in preparation for salah, his face would change. The color would drain from it. A trembling would enter his limbs. People who saw this for the first time were alarmed. They asked him what was wrong. He said, "Do you not know before whom I'm about to stand? Just wudu, just the preparation." And yet for him, the preparation for prayer was the preparation for the most significant meeting possible in the entire span of human experience. Because he knew in his bones that the one he was about to address was simultaneously Rahman Rahim and Maliki Yawmiddin. Limitless mercy and absolute justice held in perfect, unresolvable by human logic unity. Now comes the pivot that transforms Fatiha from a theological description into a living conversation. The first 3.5 verses have spoken about Allah in the third person, His attributes named, His qualities described, the realities of His dominion acknowledged. It is the voice of someone describing a reality to themselves, orienting themselves, recalling what they know, and then, at the exact center of the surah, the grammatical person shifts. There is no longer a he, suddenly there is a you. The servant stops describing and starts addressing. The distance that might exist between speaker and subject collapses entirely. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. You alone we worship, and you alone we ask for help. This moment deserves everything you can bring to it. The Arabic grammar carries a significance that translation can gesture toward, but not fully convey. In standard Arabic sentence construction, the verb comes first. We worship you. Simple, direct, true. But in this verse, the object, iyyaka, you, is moved to the front of the sentence, before the verb, before the action. This is not poetic variation. This is deliberate, grammatically significant emphasis. It creates exclusivity. It says, the one we are directing this toward, before we even name the action, is you. Not habit, not reputation, not the approval of the people around us, not the fear of social consequence, not the accumulation of wealth or status or comfort. Before anything else is declared, before the action is even named, you, and nothing else. This matters at a level that is almost impossible to overstate, because the human heart is extraordinarily creative in manufacturing alternative objects of devotion, often without realizing it. The drift is rarely dramatic. It is almost always gradual, composed of small realignments so subtle they barely register as choices. Fear of people's judgment quietly becomes a stronger motivator than the desire to please Allah. The need for status subtly displaces the pursuit of sincerity. The hunger for comfort gradually overrides the call of obligation. The culture's definition of success slowly becomes more operationally real than the Quran's definition of success, even for people who would firmly insist they know the difference. These are not dramatic apostasies requiring someone to formally renounce their faith. They are the slow, quiet erosion of the inner compass that happens when Iyyaka na'budu is recited 40 times a day but never truly inhabited. Every rak'ah, Fatiha asks you to perform this inner recalibration, not once in your life, at a moment of dramatic conversion. 40 times per day. Because 40 times per day the drift can occur, and 40 times per day the compass must be reset. This is not a spiritual luxury for those with leisure to pursue deep religious contemplation. This is the basic maintenance of the human soul against its natural tendencies. Notice also the plural, na'budu, we worship, not abudu, I worship. Even when you stand completely alone at 2 a.m. in a silent room and there is no one else in sight, Fatiha does not allow you to become spiritually isolated. You speak in the voice of an entire ummah. You carry in your mouth the voice of every believer across the length of history who has stood in prayer with the same weakness, the same need, the same reaching toward the same Lord. You are never only yourself in Salah. You are part of something that extends in every direction beyond what you can see. Then the second half of the verse, inseparable from the first, wa iyyaka nasta'in, and you alone we ask for help. Worship and dependence placed immediately side by side, because their juxtaposition reveals something essential about what it actually means to be human in relation to the divine. You carry the intention to worship. You carry the direction, the face turned toward Allah, the will oriented toward His pleasure. But you do not and cannot carry the power to sustain yourself on that path without continuous divine assistance. This verse is therefore not only a declaration of faith, it is a confession of structural limitation. I want this. I want to be the person who walks the sirat. I want my worship to be real and my heart to be present and my life to be in alignment with what I know to be true, and I cannot do it alone. The longing is genuine, the capacity is insufficient. You alone can bridge that gap. There is a profound and liberating humility in this. The person who says, I will manage on my own, I don't need to ask for help, I'm capable enough, has not yet genuinely encountered the depths of their own fragility. They have not yet stood at the edge of their own limitations and looked down. But the person who says, Iyyaka nasta'in, who means it in the moment of saying it, who brings their real insufficiency to the words rather than just their tongue, has crossed something important, has let go of something heavy. Pride requires the illusion of self-sufficiency. This single phrase dissolves that illusion with 6 Arabic syllables, gently but completely. And the order matters. Worship is declared before help is requested, because you cannot meaningfully ask for direction without first naming your destination. You orient yourself. I am yours. I am facing toward you. I acknowledge your sovereignty, and I choose to direct my existence toward your pleasure. And then, from that position of orientation, you say, now help me stay here. Help me remain what I just declared I want to be. This verse stands at the exact center of Fatiha, the 4th of 7 verses, with 3 before it and 3 after it. In the Hadith, Allah says, I have divided this prayer between me and my servant into 2 halves. The first half, the recognition of divine attributes, belongs to me. The second half, the supplication, belongs to my servant. And this verse is the hinge between them. The precise, irreplaceable moment when recognition becomes intimacy, when description becomes address, when theology becomes relationship. From this center, the supplication unfolds in widening clarity. Ihdinas siratal mustaqim, guide us to the straight path. And immediately a question arises that is more important than it might initially appear. Why does someone already Muslim, already standing in the act of worship, already engaged in the most intimate communication available to a human being? Why do they need to ask for guidance as though they have not yet received it? The answer reaches past the surface of the question and into something most people spend their lives avoiding. Guidance is not a certificate. It is not a status awarded at a particular moment and retained permanently regardless of what follows. It is not the spiritual equivalent of a diploma that hangs on the wall and cannot be taken down. Guidance is a living condition, a dynamic state that requires continuous maintenance, like a fire that needs tending, like a course that must be actively adjusted against the constant pull of dozens of competing currents. A person can be genuinely on the right path in the morning and have drifted measurably by evening. Not through any single dramatic failure, not through any conscious decision to abandon what they knew to be true, but through the accumulation of 100 small choices, the word that left your mouth with more edge than necessary, the moment of honesty that was slightly bent for convenience, the obligation that was set aside once and then set aside again, the slow thickening of the gap between what I believe and how I actually live. This is why Idinan, guide us, is not a request made once at the beginning of faith and then retired. It is said 40 times every day, embedded in the one surah without which prayer itself has no validity. Because 40 times a day, the human being needs to come back to the compass and check their bearing. Because 40 times a day, the drift can have occurred. Because the path is genuinely narrow and the pulls away from it are genuinely strong and constant and often disguised as entirely reasonable choices. The word sirat means a path, but the connotations in Arabic carry more than simple directionality. It suggests a clear, open road, not a narrow trail cut through undergrowth that might or might not continue, but a road built for travel, visible and traversable. A mustaqim means straight, not in the rigid sense of inflexibility, but in the sense of not bending toward either extreme. Because the human tendency is always to lean toward excessive rigor or toward comfortable laxity, and toward the emotional religiosity that substitutes feeling for truth, or toward the intellectual sophistication that has gradually gone cold and hollow, toward the harshness that mistakes severity for sincerity, or toward the looseness that mistakes kindness for the absence of standards. The sirat is the extraordinarily difficult, constantly demanding, actively navigated center. Not a passive default, but a path walked with conscious, recurring intention. Then the Sirat is given faces, made human, and therefore reachable. Siratal ladina anamta alayhim. The path of those upon whom you have bestowed favor. In another place in the Quran, this category is defined with precision. The prophets, the Siddiqeen, who lived with radical honesty and sincerity as their primary orientation. The Shuhada, who paid the ultimate price for their refusal to choose compromise over truth. And the righteous servants who maintained integrity in the daily texture of ordinary life. These are not abstract ideals. They were real people who walked on real earth under real pressure. They were misunderstood, sometimes violently. They were tested in ways that would break most of us. They were lonely in their convictions more often than they were celebrated for them. And they walked the path anyway, not because it was comfortable, because it was true. And here Fatiha draws a distinction that quietly subverts every assumption the world makes about what a blessed life looks like. The real favor, the favor these people received, the favor you are asking for when you recite this verse, was not wealth, was not health or status or long life or influence or the respect of their contemporaries. Many of them had none of these. The favor was guidance itself, to see clearly, to know the truth and be given the strength to live it, to walk through a world that constantly offers easier alternatives and to remain aligned with what you know to be real, in a civilization that defines blessing almost entirely in terms of accumulation and defines privilege by altitude. Fatiha quietly insists on a different accounting. The truly favored are those who were given the gift of alignment between what they knew and how they lived, between their inner compass and their outer choices. Every rak'ah, you are asking to be placed among them, not to receive their circumstances, but to embody their character. This is a bigger request than it appears. It is not asking for ease. It is asking for the kind of strength that makes you capable of choosing truth even when the cost is high. And then the surah closes, not with a crescendo of aspiration, but with something equally essential. A warning. Quiet, clean, precisely placed. Ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Not the path of those who earned divine displeasure, and not the path of those who went astray. Two categories. Two directions of failure, and the Sirat al-Mustaqim runs between them like a path along a ridge with a drop on either side, requiring not just forward movement, but constant, aware, balanced navigation. The first group, those who earned wrath and displeasure, are not characterized by ignorance. Ignorance might be forgivable. It is at minimum understandable. What defines this group is knowledge they possessed and refused to act upon. They recognized the truth and turned away from it. Not because they hadn't seen it, but because acting on it was inconvenient, because it conflicted with desire, because it threatened the structures of power or comfort or self-image they had built their lives around. This is the deviation of dry knowledge, of religious sophistication that produces no transformation, of theological correctness that insulates the ego rather than dismantling it. The person who can quote the Quran fluently and uses that fluency to justify their predetermined conclusions. The scholar whose knowledge has curdled into arrogance so complete they have stopped being capable of learning anything from anyone. The danger here is pride, wearing the clothing of piety, invisible from the outside and often invisible even to the one wearing it. The second group, those who went astray, failed not through refusal but through misdirection. They may have been genuinely sincere. They may have deeply, authentically wanted the truth, wanted to serve God, wanted to live rightly. But sincerity without grounding in revelation is navigation without instruments. It will point in whatever direction the emotions pull, the culture pushes, or the ego prefers. Not because the person is malicious, but because human feeling by itself is not a reliable guide to divine will. The danger here is earnestness without anchor, enthusiasm without knowledge, the warmth of devotion that has come untethered from the structure of what was actually revealed. The Sirat al-Mustaqim is neither. It is the integration of both knowledge and submission, understanding the truth deeply and bowing to it completely. Not the arrogance of those who know, and not the drift of those who only feel. Both knowledge and surrender held together, each checking and completing the other. And Fatiha ends by asking to be kept from both extremes, not because they are distant theoretical dangers, but because both exist as real potentials inside every human being, and the drift toward either can happen so gradually that significant distance is covered before the movement is even noticed. Now stand back and hold the entire surah in view at once. See it as a complete architecture rather than a sequence of isolated verses. It opens by repositioning you, not at the center of the universe, but in honest, accurate relation to the center. And from that position, it invites the first movement of a genuine spiritual life, unconditional praise. Then it wraps you in mercy, not once, but multiply insistently, because the mercy must be truly absorbed before the next movement is possible. Accountability, the reminder that you are not drifting through an indifferent cosmos where nothing will ever be weighed or addressed or resolved. Then it brings you into direct speech, no mediator, no buffer, no theological distance. A conversation in real time between a human soul and the Lord of all worlds happening right now inside the few square feet of your prayer space. Then it makes you name the fundamental need, direction, not wealth, not health, not success as the world defines it, the need to walk in the right direction. Then it gives you the faces of those who walked this path before you, making the abstract concrete and the ideal human. And finally it names the two ways the path is lost, through knowledge divorced from submission, and through sincerity divorced from truth, so that you can recognize the warning signs before the drift becomes a departure. 7 movements, 7 thresholds, and you cross all 7 in order 40 times every day, or, and this is the question that should sit with you, you recite the words of all 7, which is not the same thing. If you genuinely absorb these movements, bring your full awareness to them, allow them to land in your heart rather than pass through your tongue, then prayer changes character entirely. It ceases to be a performance of religiosity and becomes what it was always intended to be, a resetting of the self, a return to alignment. 5 times a day, Salah offers you a reset. 40 times a day, Fatiha offers you a realignment. The Arabic word istiqamah, often translated as steadfastness, comes from the same root as mustaqimna. It means maintaining alignment with the straight path, and Fatiha is the daily, recurring, insistent practice of that maintenance. Complaint diminishes when Hamd is genuinely inhabited. Despair loses its grip when Rahman and Rahim are internalized rather than merely mentioned. Carelessness is interrupted by the weight of Maliki Yawmiddin. Pride is quietly, repeatedly dismantled by Shiyaka Nasta'in. And the spiritual drift that accumulates invisibly throughout each day is interrupted 40 times by the humble, honest, structurally necessary prayer. Guide us, still, again, today as well. Before the surah even begins, before it Alhamdulillah is spoken, there is a threshold, a doorway, an invocation that frames everything that follows. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Rahman, the Rahim. The universe, physicists tell us, began in a single moment of staggering creative force, a point of infinite density and temperature, an event so far beyond ordinary scale that all our descriptive language fails. But that description addresses only the external mechanics. It describes the what without touching the why, the how without reaching the who. The interior of that moment, the will, the intention, the love, the mercy that initiated it and that continues to sustain it, is what Bismillah points toward. The one in whose name existence itself began. And when you begin anything, a meal, a journey, a conversation, a decision, a prayer, in the name of Rahman and Rahim, you are not merely invoking blessing as a cultural habit. You are consciously, deliberately inserting your action into the same stream of divine intention that initiated the cosmos. You are saying, I am not launching into the void alone. I am not setting out from a position of self-sufficiency. I begin in the name of the one whose mercy was present before anything else existed, and whose mercy will remain when everything else is ended. There is a freedom in this that has no equivalent in any other act. Fear requires you to be alone against something larger than yourself. Bismillah ends aloneness. The young man from the first generation of Islam who mounted his horse before an impossible confrontation and said, Bismillah. Out loud, perhaps the person next to him smiled. Perhaps they thought it was ritual rather than reality. But that young man knew something in his bones that most people spend their lives intellectually assenting to without fully inhabiting. That the name of Rahman and Rahim is not a charm or a formula. It is a statement of ontological reality. I am not the source. The source has a name, and I begin in that name. With that knowing, fear has nowhere to stand. This is Fatiha, not a ritual. Not a religious obligation discharged 40 times a day to keep the divine accounting in order. Not a formula recited to validate the structural requirements of prayer. It is the secret architecture of a life built on correct perception. 7 verses that, when truly understood rather than merely recited, have the capacity to rebuild a person from their foundations outward, to relocate the center from self to source, to replace complaint with hamd, fear with trust, heedlessness with responsibility, pride with the humility of acknowledged need, drift with the 40 times daily return to the compass. The question has never been whether you have recited Fatiha before. Of course you have, perhaps thousands of times. The question, the only question that matters now at the end of all this, is whether in your next prayer, perhaps just hours away, or perhaps just minutes, you will recite it for what might honestly be called the very first time. With the heart present. With the words carrying their actual weight. With the awareness that when you say Manjim Alhamdulillah, something in the heavens responds. With the knowledge that when you say Niyaka Nabudush, you are not performing, you are declaring. And when you say Rihdinas Sirat al-Mustaqim, you are not repeating a memorized supplication. You are expressing the deepest and most essential need of the human soul in the only language that has ever fully captured it. The door has been opened. It was always open. The only question was whether we would walk through it with our eyes open. If this stirred something in you, if somewhere in these words you recognized something you had been carrying without language for it, then share it. Not for a count or a metric, but because somewhere out there is someone whose prayers have gone quiet and mechanical. Someone who recites Fatiha every day while standing in a conversation they no longer realize is happening. Someone who needs to hear that the door is open, and the Lord on the other side of it is Rahman and Rahim, and has been waiting with infinite patience. Subscribe so you don't miss the next step in this journey through the Quran. Like this video so the algorithm carries it to someone who needs it tonight, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because every city, every country, every name that appears, there is a reminder that this path is walked by millions, across every time zone and every language, and none of us, not one of us, walks it alone.